Welcome to Franchise Canada Chats, the podcast that takes you inside the world of Canadian franchising. I'm Renée Boudakian, founder and CEO of Rubicon Franchise Partners and your host for Season 9. This season, we're going beyond the business model to uncover the real stories of franchise owners, the risks they took, the lessons they learned, and the successes they built. Join us as we sit down with franchisees, their franchisors, and industry experts to discuss emerging trends, cutting-edge technologies, and operational strategies shaping the future of franchising. Whether you're thinking about buying your first or next franchise, this podcast is your inside track to franchise success in Canada. Today on Franchise Canada Chats, we're joined by David Everitt, a longtime franchisee with the UPS Store whose journey with the brand spans more than 30 years. David's connection to the franchise runs deep. He and his family were involved when the brand first entered Canada, and his own store was among the original 285 Mailbox Etc. locations that rebranded in 2005 to the UPS Store. Over the years, he's owned multiple locations, served as an area franchisee, and today continues to operate a store in Thunder Bay, Ontario. He's also played an active role within the system, serving on the Franchise Advisory Council and mentoring fellow franchisees along the way. In this episode, we'll talk about staying committed to a franchise over the long term, navigating brand evolution, and growing a business in a smaller market. David, welcome to Franchise Canada Chats.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. I'm super excited to talk and get to know more about your story, David. You've been with the UPS Store for such a long time. I think it's incredible. And so I would love to talk about if we can rewind the clock and if you can tell us before you became a franchise owner, what was your life like? What were you doing 31 plus years ago? And how did you find your way into franchising?
So, prior to entering the mailboxes, et cetera, slash the UPS store system, I was in the hotel and restaurant industry business. I worked with the Holiday Inns, the Ramada hotels in the UK. Then I came back into Canada, and I was with Pizza Hut Canada, or yeah, Pizza Hut Canada, with the Swiss Chalet, and I was in the process of opening up my own restaurant in Guelph, Ontario, when the opportunity for opening up a Mailbox Etc. store in Thunder Bay, Ontario came up. Now, Thunder Bay being my hometown, my dad was looking at a retirement project uh, after he left the education system, and Mailboxes, etc., had a strong connection with UPS Canada, and UPS was pulling out of Thunder Bay in February of 1994. We opened our location up in the end of March of 1994.
I think that's amazing. And I love that you can recall it just like it was yesterday as well. And so you were already going down the path of looking to open your own business. And did you always want to be a business owner? Like, what was it about running your own business or starting your own business that was attracting you to the restaurant model and then pivoting into franchising? Did you know that being a business owner was always it for you?
Yes, being a business owner was always there. Um, my, you know, growing up, I was a paper boy. I worked in some restaurants. I knew that I wanted to be independent, and owning my own business. I have a couple of uncles that are business owners. I always looked to them with admiration and wanting to be in their shoes. Um, my siblings are all educators. I'm the only one that's not in education. So being an entrepreneur has always been there for me.
I think that's amazing. And what was it like having the opportunity to work with your in a family business? Really, you're doing this business with your father, as you said. It's a retirement business for him. What was that? What went through your mind of having the opportunity to work with family?
So when we opened up, this business was, my father had looked at it thinking it was going to be a retirement business for him. Um, it quickly evolved into a business for me. We opened it up using uh, finances my parents had. Over the years, I've purchased it from them, but I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Uh, I started working with my mom in the business, and as my dad was still working, and he couldn't have quote ties with the business. Um, but it was fun. It was challenging working with my parents, coming up with the understanding of, instead of a mother-son relationship, working together as employees, as bosses together, um, understanding the coming up with sort of words that said, you know what, Mom, just back off a little bit while I work with the customer, without, coming up with words that are, you know, not good for air, you know.
Right. Did you call them mom and dad at work, or did you kind of transition into how did?
I had to transition to Doreen and Bill. Mom and dad were great, but to expand and to make the business professional, moving the term from mom and dad to Bill and Doreen were what we really needed to do.
Yeah, I completely resonate with that. For a year, I worked in my own family's business, and I also had to learn to not call them mom and dad. So, totally get that experience, but also agree that it really professionalizes the experience to both amongst yourselves, but also to the customer, importantly. And so, when your dad came and he said, like, there's this opportunity, what was it about then mailboxes, etc., which then transitioned to the UPS store? But what was it about the brand that made you fall in love with the brand?
It was, first of all, it was new, and I was trying to take what skills did I have working in the restaurant, hotel industry, and could bring it into a retail industry. Customer service was the big thing. Everything was customer service. Um, what made me fall in love with it? It was new. It was something that I saw that I could, push or sell in Thunder Bay. Um, the as I tell people, um, the restrictions on the what we could do was very limited. So we couldn't sell clothing, we couldn't sell auto parts, we couldn't, sell food. So it was business services. So, doing phone services or doing secretarial services or, the photocopying and the binding and the graphic arts and all that sort of stuff. We were only limited to, you know, that kind of stuff, which was nice, which is wonderful.
Definitely. I mean, there's pros and cons for sure. I think it takes the right type of entrepreneur to see the possibilities and capabilities, especially when a brand is still growing, like
Yeah.
and still in its kind of like infancy stage, so to speak. Whereas now it's like a much more established brand. It's a legacy brand. But back then, it was a new opportunity in a rural area, mind
Yes.
you. And so it takes the right type of entrepreneur to be able to take that opportunity and see how are they going to see the vision for the opportunity. Because on the other side, when there isn't enough, let's say guardrails around a system, that can also that some franchisees may not thrive in that system as well. So I loved hearing that. And do you remember? I know again we're dialing back a little bit, but do you remember any of the research or any due diligence that you and your family did before taking the leap?
Well, so I come from a family of I have two brothers and a sister. Um, I have a brother who actually was working with UPS when we purchased into the system. Um, he was working as an account executive, so he had knowledge of the brand. He's the one that actually introduced it to my dad.
Okay.
Um, and he is a business. He's currently a business professor in uh, Kitchener, Waterloo, at one of the universities. Um, and so he had done a little bit of research on the store. My dad then got into the, sort of digging as to what the franchise had. I was introduced to it uh, as we were starting to do the serious talking. um, I had the hands-on customer service knowledge. I looked at it and said, yeah, it looks like a fun business. It looks very different than what I'm doing right now. It had a good track record for support, for franchisee support, for that kind of thing, the hand holding, the you know when I called up and said help, you know, I got help. Um, so the due diligence was done, by a number of my family members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes total sense. And it's always helpful, I think, when there's someone who's close to a brand, like your brother in that case,
Yeah,
kind of having that knowledge of being able to then say, like, hey, I see a great opportunity here, and putting their stamp of approval on it, more or less. So I think that that's really, really neat. And then if we think back to the onboarding process, so actually, before I ask the question about onboarding, let's talk about capital because you touched on it for a brief moment. And um, that is a key question that I think a lot of individuals who want to be business owner, like raising the capital to starting a business, is a question or a hurdle that they need
yeah,
to overcome. And so, in your case, you mentioned it was your parents that put the initial capital
right.
injection, but you paid them back over years. Anything you want to add to that, or anything about the investment side, and maybe the buyout structure of how did you do that in your case?
So in the initial setup, it was, my parents put the money in. I was too young in the eyes of the mailboxes, etc. franchise to own one of their stores. Um, they wanted somebody who was older. They wanted somebody who was established. Um, I couldn't go in the system at a 27-year-old and say I wanted to buy a store.
You didn't
They,
fit the profile
I
at the
didn't
time.
fit the profile. I did not. So my parents fit the profile. Um, and so, my parents came in with me and we did the purchasing. Um, and within a couple of years, the whole system, you know, when we opened up, a 386 computer was the top of the line computer, right?
Mm.
You know, we had no email, we had no, internet. There was none of that. Um, and so, within a couple of years, all of that stuff started developing and things started growing faster than what my parents could quite, grasp and understand and that sort of thing. And so it was a rapidly changing market.
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure. I mean, the huge benefit in having kind of different generations, really, because you being the younger generation were able to probably keep up with all the
yeah.
technological advancements much more.
Yes, and even now, like I look at my staff, and my staff are, the 20-year-olds, and it's like I turn around and go, okay, how do I do this, guys? Like this AI stuff is just changing, changing me and changing the world. And I had one of my young staff members, I said, I need to create a logo. And he goes, oh, you just type it into AI and they generate it for you. And I'm like, what? you know.
it it's moving very fast for sure. And do you, I mean, maybe it's still very early days, but do you see any of these technology, AI automations? Do you see the UPS store bringing that into their system? Maybe they have already, or maybe,
I
it's in
use
the
it
in the works.
I use it right now in my graphic end of stuff. You know,
Mm,
you know, the removal of backgrounds in photos and you know, all that sort of stuff. Um, I use it for helping to type letters. I mean, I'm not the best person to sit at a computer and throw letters together. I mean, uh, you know, over the years, it's always been, Dad, I need you to type me a letter up or put me a letter together because I just can't put the concepts together. Now, you know, I type it into AI and it generates for me. I read through it, make sure there's no spelling errors, make sure it sounds right. And, you know, that is where things are going.
totally. I agree with you 100%. And I think that allowing it to get you to a good working draft is one of the best ways of using it right
Yeah.
now. And it's going to continue to evolve in the ways that it can continue to help our businesses. So, very cool that you're already figuring out ways and using it and adopting it. Um, and so I'd love to talk a little bit about your experience because you're in Thunder Bay. I've actually driven through Thunder Bay. I went from I did a road trip from Ontario, from Toronto, Ontario, and I drove to Vancouver, British Columbia, and Thunder Bay was one of the kind of mile like the checkpoints like we
Right.
drove to. Um, and so this was many years ago, probably 15 years ago. But it was a rural experience. Like it was, it's maybe more developed now, but I'd love to know your experience of opening a business in a more what we would call rural area, not as, it's
Not
not
the
a major,
GTA. Yeah, not
not
the
the
GTA,
GTA. Correct.
not the big cities, not the it was challenging. When we first opened up, our area support was out of Winnipeg. Um, and corporate office was in Oakville. Um, and there was no, you know, if I wanted to see a store or talk to a fellow franchisee, you know, I'd have to go to Winnipeg, I'd have to go to Toronto. And so developing and understanding what was going on. And again, there was no internet. So you couldn't go on and Google, you know, the UPS store or Google how to, you know, print a document or how to, you know, do some of the stuff that we do. Um, so I took the opportunity at the time to, you know, when I purchased my supplies, I would take my van down to Toronto, load it up with boxes, you know, from our suppliers, stop in at a couple of stores, learn stuff that was going on, and then drive back to Thunder Bay and go, okay, you know, I've learned a couple of things. Let's introduce them here. Um, the trade magazines, you know, the printing magazines, you know, I would be reading them and learning the stuff that was going on to be able to develop and bring stuff to, you know, the Thunder Bay market.
I think that's super cool that you, even from the very beginning, were going and kind of seeing what's happening in other markets and then bringing that intel back. Kind of, I mean, I suppose you had to be very proactive
Yeah.
because the internet was just kind of coming. I don't exactly remember the year it came, but I know it was the early 90s. And, it then took years to like get it to
Yeah.
where it is
Yeah.
today. So, um, in terms of, so let's talk a little bit then about the different kind of roles that you've played within the UPS store system. So you have your very established 30 plus year, 31 year franchise location in Thunder Bay. But I also know in your story that you've also been a area franchisee as well. And I'd love to talk a little bit about what that is. I know that you've since sold that back to, you're no longer the area franchisee, but you were that for many years and helped to develop many stores. And so, can we talk a little bit about what is the difference between a single unit franchisee and an area franchisee, and what your experience was of those?
Sure. When so back in the day of the mailboxes, et cetera, slash the UPS store, um, we had our Canadian corporate office or our Canadian master license franchisee. Um, and then it came down into the next level, which was the area franchisee. So there was the uh, British Columbia area. There was the Alberta, Saskatchewan area. There was the Manitoba, Northern Ontario, excuse me, area. And then it broke down into a number of areas within the Southern Ontario and then Eastern Canada and Quebec. Um, and so the area that I owned was Northern Ontario. So it went from the Manitoba border to just north of Parry Sound. And so that in that area, we were responsible as area owners was to uh, sell stores, develop stores, support stores, all that sort of stuff. Now we did there was part of the royalty stream would come into our pocket uh, based on how well our stores did. So if our stores were doing really well, we made decent money. Um, and so my whole philosophy was let's support the stores. Let's, you know, visit them on site, spend the time with them, help them out in the marketing, in the introduction of new products, that that sort of um, support. Um, Nowadays, there are changes, but we sold stores. There was at one point three stores in Thunder Bay. There were stores in Fort Frances, in Kenora, in Timmins, in Sault Ste. Marie, in North Bay, in Sudbury. So, I always did a road trip. Every quarter it was on site visiting stores or my dad on site visiting stores, supporting them. We used conference calling to, have our area meetings to support people, uh, and it worked. I mean, you did what you had to do.
And so going back to, because you're providing all this support, and just for the listeners to make sure that they understand. So the area rep um, goes above and beyond just being a single unit franchisee. They're supporting all of the area that they're developing, those
Yes,
franchisees within that. And the benefit of that is that by helping those franchisees start and get up and running and be successful and have ongoing operations, you get a share of the royalty stream. So
that's
you're
correct.
building a more passive, you can say, quote
Yeah,
unquote, revenue stream for yourself, but it still requires a great deal of support from your
right.
end to
Correct.
that. That absolutely makes a lot of sense. And I think is a very interesting aspect of franchising that I would love for more people to know about. But it's not always roses, as I like to say. And there was one location, there was, as you mentioned, three locations in Thunder Bay, but I'd love to talk about the one location that you ended up having to take. You ended up taking back and running. And so tell me a little bit about, or tell the listeners what happened in that situation.
So in that situation, we had sold a franchise to a gentleman, um, and he ran it. He ran it well. But there was a point where he said, "I don't want to do it anymore," and he walked away from it. And so at that time, our our corporate office was under we were under the understanding of, we would purchase it back and run it and get it up and running and then resell it to a new franchisee, which is what we did. Um, it was challenging owning two locations, especially with my personality. People always wanted to come and talk to David, right? And my staff were always saying, "Well, David's working at the, you know, South End store. Or, David is at this location, and the customers tended to follow where I was. Um, and quite often I passed them on the road between locations, you
That's
know.
so funny.
And so, customers were going, okay, we're getting frustrated. Where are you, David? What store are you in? And I always said, talk to the staff. The staff will take the order, and I will have my hands on it. I will know what's going on. Um, and it developed. We were able to develop the two stores. Sometimes the Fort William store ran certain jobs because it was easier to run on the machines they had there. Sometimes it was done in our inner city location where, things were being developed. But as a multi-center owner, you need to make sure that your staff are able to do the jobs and make the customer feel comfortable and confident that they're going to be able to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And you ran both locations or you had multi centers, you had two centers for a number of years. Was it,
Yes.
and so what ultimately led you to the decision to sell that location? I know it was under the understanding with corporate from the very
Yeah.
beginning. But what was it that ultimately had you move to that decision and sell that location?
Just quality of life, because I was bouncing between the locations and it was just becoming a lot of work, a lot of extra, you know, um, I guess being in a small market, um, people were able to find me, right? And at the time, um, my customers, I'm a very personable person, and my customers wanted to talk to David, and they still come into my one store and they want to talk to David, even though I'm pulling back in my day-to-day on hands in the store situation. I'm looking at my exit strategy, my retirement, and that sort of stuff. Um, but they wanted to see me. They wanted to be uh, me to do the job for them. Where nine
Got
times
it.
out of 10, I took the job and I passed it off to my staff member because my staff members were the ones that were able to do the job, do the work.
Makes total sense. And I think that that is some nuances perhaps of just being in a smaller, more rural area, is that it has that small town feel and
Yeah,
everybody knows everybody, and they want to do business with the business owner. And so very, very interesting. When you were describing them finding you, I was imagining not where's Waldo, but like where's David, and
yeah,
them
yeah.
looking for you.
And
Uh,
that's what it was. That's what it was the, bouncing back and forth. And, I stop and I think of, when 9/11 happened. And, I know exactly where I was when, I was driving between the two stores when I heard of the towers dropping. And it was then, okay, planes are not going up. We have to stop all of our air activity and that kind of stuff. Um, and I had to be on top of both stores saying, don't take any more, air because that's what has happened.
Right, of course, of course. Um, so I'd love to segue to the question of support. And
Okay.
I would love to ask about what kind of support systems does the UPS store offer to you as a franchisee? Like, what kind of things would you reach out to corporate for, as an example?
So right now, being in the system for so long, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
don't reach out to corporate as much as I did. Um, I reach out to corporate for marketing, for putting pieces together. I reach out to uh, corporate for support on problem issues with packages that I just can't deal with. Like I'm just, I've exhausted my reach, my support, because I've been in the system so long, I have all these different people I know. Um, but corporate supports, corporate does support on the marketing, on the uh, training, the using of our point of sale system, all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to hear from such a veteran franchisee like yourself that there, although you reach out less, there are still some things that you do reach out to them, you lean on support for, but there's also a lot of things that now, I think being a new franchisee or in your earlier years, but being such a seasoned franchisee, you probably know a lot of you have tribal knowledge, I would assume, but
Yes.
then there's
Yeah.
still things that you reach out to them like for marketing, like you mentioned. So, and did the support differ when you were an area franchisee of what corporate would provide you with, that different levels of support?
Yes. Yes. Because the back in the day when we had the area franchisee was the person you went to for support. So, you needed to know as an area franchisee how to do this stuff, how to deal with the problem issues, how to, you know, uh, my copier's not working. How do I make it work? How do I how do I reach out and work with our shipping software? All that sort of stuff was the responsibility of the area franchisee knowing how to use it.
Got it. Got it. It makes total sense. Um, so if we think about some of your favorite parts about being a franchisee with the UPS store, what would you say that is for you?
Favorite parts. I like the fact that it is a franchise, that we have multiple stores within our system. I like the fact that um, we're standardized. Things are done the same way or should be done the same way in each and every store.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. For sure. Anything else? I didn't want to cut you off there. Anything else you wanted to add?
well, I mean, I like the fact that we have the ability to grow in certain areas. So in my particular location, I mean, I'm one of the top stores in the system. Um, I have an engraving machine. I have a perfect bind book machine. So I do lots of engraving, lots of trophies, lots of awards. Um, uh, we do lamicois. We do rubber stamps in-house, like the old-fashioned hand, you know, those are all done in-house. I don't need to reach out to a supplier to do them. Um, I have a t-shirt press. I have, sublimation. So we do coffee mugs and we do all that sort of stuff in-house. Um, we have a single-sided laminator. So I can do, all those single-sided glossy business cards that you think about buying from Vistaprint or, that kind of thing. I do that all in-house. We have a foiler. So we can do gold foiling or you know, red foiling on invites and business cards and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff is not each and every franchise store has it, but some of us I've been able to work in those different areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like you have so many offerings that you can provide, so many services that you can provide your customers with. I think that's incredible. And from what you know of the system, so you have gone and done those things, like you offer those services. Can other franchisees in other markets offer them, or
Yes,
okay,
yes. There are,
so they can
you can reach
choose?
out, you can either bring the equipment in yourself or you can work with suppliers to provide those services, or you can work with other UPS stores to supply those products. I work with a couple of stores providing the rubber stamps and the trophies and that kind of thing. I work with them one-on-one. I have an independent store up in Timmins that I do lots of rubber stamps with. So,
Very interesting. So you could also or and do supply services to other UPS stores?
yes,
Very interesting. How it's like a symbiotic and you can support each other. If they don't want to insource the service, they can
yes,
work with someone who else has already done that work. Very
that's right.
interesting. Um, I'd love to ask because we've talked about some of the great parts of being a franchisee, which I think as you touched on a lot of those things, David. There's the support, there's the standardization, there's a system, there's room for growth. But I think business ownership is not without challenges, and especially if you're in a rural area, it adds another layer of
Yep.
challenges. Are there any parts of running the business that have been more challenging than you expected, and how have you handled those challenges?
So owning a business is always challenging. And I have found that I've looked at what are the worst parts, what are the things I don't like doing, what are the challenges I have. Um, I don't like accounting. So, outsourcing that, giving it to a staff member, that kind of thing is sort of, I can do graphic arts, but it's not the funnest thing to do. So I have hired a graphic artist, you know. Um, Challenges with the business in itself is your time management, your, you know, understanding, how do I want to put it? Um, your life work balance. And it is challenging, especially
It,
now with technology. Everybody can find you. The cell phone gets you wherever you are.
it makes sense. I mean, I think that the work-life balance is become more imbalanced for a lot of folks,
Yes.
especially with the accessibility. And it's almost like you have to create better boundaries for yourself. And, when am I working? When am I not working? What am I um, you know when am I responding to emergencies, who's responding to those
Yep.
emergencies, all of the above. And so, and then also personnel, I've heard it time and time again that when you have a great team, it makes all the difference, but still staffing and managing a team can be challenging for some. Would you say most of your team that works with you, have they been with you for a long time, or do you have also the uh, need to continuously hire and bring new people into the business?
I have two staff members that have been with me 5 and 6 years. Um, but as we grow, we got to bring the staff in. My front counter staff, uh, there's a flip. Staffing is always going to be the issue. There's always going to be some of the stuff you're going to have to deal with. Um, I am currently going through a growth period, a growth spurt. Um, and so I'm bringing on new staff. I currently have two new staff that are working with me. I've got a staff member that started in September last year, who is still learning the business because we are constantly growing. Um, as I start bringing on, new products that we can do with our current equipment, there's always that learning curve. There's always that upsell, cross-sell with customers, training my staff that, oh, we can do this. How do we do it? What do we have to do?
What do you think? So is it fair to say that you're a lifer in the UPS store system? I mean,
I have been a lifer.
yes.
And I love the franchise. I love working with franchisees. I am, we have a franchisee Facebook page that is locked down that nobody else can get at. Um, and the questions and the support. I mean, as we've been doing this conversation, I've noticed a couple of messages come through my phone from other franchisees going, "Help," you know, and I have a couple of franchisees that call me a couple times a day for support. They're new in the system. I log on, I team view in on their system, show them how to do a couple of things, and then, you know, let them go.
I think that that's amazing. I was gonna ask, what do you think it is about your particular store that allows you to retain talent for such like, as you said, 5 and 6 years? That's more than half a decade and plus. What do you think it is about the way you run your store that the listeners can take away, things that you're doing to retain great talent?
You have to pay them appropriately. You have to treat them as human beings. Um, you have to, expect that there are going to be some. I mean, I love my staff. I love the staff that I have. The, you know, I don't know. I don't know what the thing what
The
the
secret
catch is.
sauce?
I don't know what that secret sauce is. Um, I really do. I appreciate my staff.
I think that's part of it. It's the genuine appreciation, because I know that it's not easy to actually 5 and 6 years. I mean, you've been in the UPS store for 30 plus years, but it also speaks to me volumes of the work environment, because somebody doesn't want to stay in a location or in a job if they're not being treated well, if they're not happy, if they don't feel challenged. Money is part of it, but money is not the most important thing for most
Yeah.
people.
No, it's not. But I mean, as I said, I love my staff, and I hope that they appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm sure they do. So, being in the system for so many years, what kind of unique experiences have you had because you're a UPS store franchisee?
Unique experiences. Um, well, I mean, my parents tell me that I could write a book on stuff that we've done, stuff that I've, you know, dealt with. I often think about the customer who came in and said to me, David, can you ship this china cabinet to Italy full of china? And it was, bring it in, I will make it happen. We crated it up, we packed the china, and we shipped it off to Italy. And it arrived safe and sound. I've got pictures of it in Italy.
Wow.
Um, you know, it's always the little challenges that people bring in that I'm always going. I mean, I think of the engineering students we had at the university who came in with their airplane that they needed to go to the United States for a competition, and they needed help packing it up and getting it to the US. We did it. We made it happen. Um, and then it's always I think about it Christmas time. We shipped off a package to Montreal, and it was a tablecloth that was this woman's grandmother's, and she was sending it off to her granddaughter, and it got misdelivered. And it was a lot of work. Um, and I'm sorry, a lot of work to track it down and figure out where it got delivered, but we were able to locate it and get it to the right location.
It must feel so good to help, number one, the customers with these, very unique and challenging shipments. But also when something goes not quite as according to plan, like in this case of the tablecloth, like you're still able to go in and help the customer and create a happy ending for them.
It is, and I have over the years, I've got the resources and I've got the connections and the right people to call. But yeah, it really does make a difference.
Absolutely. So if you were talking to someone who's considering franchising and not quite sure if this is the path that they want to go down. Maybe they're considering independent business ownership like you once were. Maybe they're considering franchising, but not quite sure the brand for themselves. What advice would you give to a prospective franchisee who's considering owning a business and wants to explore the franchise pathway?
So the thing with franchising is, or a franchise is, you have to look at what their product is. Um, I believe buying into a franchise is a smart move. Um, they've got the tools, they've got the method, they've got the system in place. Um, being uh, an independent, you have to do a lot of work. You have to put everything in place. You have to understand stuff. You have to deal with all that sort of stuff. And um, like like all the framework and in the franchise business, you don't have to think. Like you do, but it's there.
Definitely. I think that, I always like to say if in an independent business you start at chapter zero, when you go into a franchise business, and especially when you align with the right franchise business that is for it well aligns with your skills and what your strengths are, and you have the financial investment, like all the boxes need to be checked, but you get to start already at chapter 5, let's say. So
Yeah.
you don't have to worry about things like what's your branding, what's your
Yeah.
offer, who's your who, all
Yeah.
of those important things that you need to figure out. What's the marketing strategy, all of that. um, well, I would love to ask really one final question for you, David, which is this: what is one truth about franchising that you know now that 30 plus years ago you didn't know when you first bought the business?
What is one truth? Um, how do I, I always looked at franchising when when I was going through school, and, you know, it was always oh, franchises are out there, they're good, but, independent is always good. I have become a believer in the franchise system, um, because they have everything. There are, you know, I I always thought, oh, at the time, Robin's Donuts was a franchise. Um, and I always went, oh, do I want to work in the coffee industry? Do I want to be doing the restaurant? Do I want to work a lot of the hours? Um, but when looking at what franchising is now, um, buying into a franchise is a smart move. You have to find the right one. Um, I always was like, I don't know if I want it. But when you've got a solid package, it's the one you want to do. When you find that right fit with you, whether it is a pet food franchise, whether it is a food related franchise, whether it is a uh, hardware store or a lumber store, when you find that right fit with you in the franchise industry, it'll all pull together.
I love that. I know I said one last question, but I thought of a bonus question, David. So
Okay.
I'm going to ask you one more, if that's okay.
Yep.
I'd love to know, considering you're starting to, as you said, pull yourself a little bit more out of the day to day and thinking a little bit about retirement, what does the next 5 years look like for David? Where do you want to be in 5 years from now?
I will be probably out of this franchise. Um, I probably will be uh, involved with another group of franchise type operations. Um, but I just need to pull away. I love working with my customers. I love the people I deal with on a day-to-day business, day to day. Um, but working the front counter is not quite where I want to be. Um,
Well,
I'm hoping to be retired. I'm hoping to be able to work, you know, half time in something.
I love it. Well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure hearing your story, hearing about your journey over the last 3 decades with the UPS store. And thank you so much for sharing such a wealth of information. I hope that it's as fruitful for our listeners as and interesting as it has been for me. And I look forward to continuing to follow along with your journey and see what's next for you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Franchise Canada Chats. I'm Renée Boudakian with Rubicon Franchise Partners, and this podcast is produced by Joelle Kidd with the Canadian Franchise Association. Missed an episode? You can find Franchise Canada Chats on Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. For expert insights, success stories, and franchise opportunities, visit franchisecanada.online. And while you're there, subscribe to Franchise Canada e-News, a trusted resource for aspiring franchisees looking to achieve their dreams and build their franchise future. If you're exploring franchise ownership, check out lookforafranchise.ca or learn more about franchising at cfa.ca. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.